Hi guys, welcome to another video over here on the good old YouTube channel. And yes, what are we going to do today? Alrighty, well what we are going to do today is we're going to transfer or change this image of a cob swan, male mute swan, and we're going to change it from this to that. Okay, where we brought out an absolute boatload of detail in the feathers. We brought out a boatload of detail in the flashy part of the face. And yeah, and if we go into the image at 100%, there is also a slight focus issue just on these feathers here. And I'm going to be repairing that with Topaz Sharpen AI, but just a little area. But we're here inside Photoshop because this is where we're going to do our work of assembly, because I'm going to switch back out to this other image here. You can see how sharp these feathers are here, but just here they're not as sharp. Why that is, I don't know, but well, there you go. But as I was saying, what we need to do is have a look, and I'm going to break this image down into a whole and two constituent parts. We're going to use the whole image. We're also going to use a separate processing of the whites and a separate processing of the dark fleshy areas. Okay, and then we might do a little bit of fiddling around as well. But for detail extraction, yes, what are we going to do? We are going to work in Raw Therapee. So today's video is going to be featuring Raw Therapee and Photoshop and a little tiny bit of Topaz Sharpen AI right at the very end. So without any further ado, I think what we better do is close these two images down, and yeah, we'll click save on that one, and we'll just click OK, yeah, and we will now scoot off into, you guessed it, Raw Therapee. And so here's the image in Raw Therapee. And if you're a Patreon member, you can get hold of this raw file. And so when you download the raw file and you bring it into Raw Therapee, and I hasten to add that I am in the dev build for Raw Therapee, but we're not going to do anything to this image that you can't do in Raw Therapee 5.8. So if you've got Raw Therapee 5.8 on your machine, the stable public release from God knows when ago, you too can follow along. So fundamentally, I brought this raw file into Raw Therapee, and this is what it looks like. And of course, I need to rotate it. So we'll just click up there, and then we will double tap there, and now we've got it in a fit to stream view. And the only thing is, because I've actually got it with mybase.pp3, and if you don't know what mybase.pp3 is, then go and watch the video. A little indicator will come up in the top right hand corner, and you can find out all about mybase.pp3. Right, now I'm not going to do anything fancy to this image. We're going to leave it on colour management. We're going to leave it as camera standard. So we're not going to be applying any sort of colour profiles to the input side of the colour management on Raw Therapee. I'm just going to try and keep this really, really, really simple. The thing is that we need to bring out texture. I've come over here into the, what do we call this, the exposure tab in Raw Therapee, because I did use on a video not so long ago tone mapping and wavelets, okay, and somebody did say that they wanted a video about tone mapping. So if we activate tone mapping on this basic imported raw file, and we just go and turn the module on, now you can see it's made one heck of a big difference. And I think what I ought to do, because if you look at tone mapping, we've got basically 5 tools in here. We've got strength, gamma, edge stopping, scale, and reweighting iterates. Yes. So I think the best thing to do will be to head off over to that there interweb, yes, and come over to Rawpedia and just quickly go through the interface, basically tool description. So the strength slider, this controls the strength of the overall effect. Yada yada yada, as of version, yeah. As you increase the strength, in other words, as you move the slider to the right, shadows are raised and highlights are slightly lowered in a way which aims to preserve the average luminance of the image, thereby preventing the washed out look. Gamma. Gamma moves the action of tone mapping to shadows or highlights. Not a very good description, that isn't, as you'll see shortly. Edge stopping. This parameter affects sensitivity to edges. Yeah. Now, when we took the image into the tone mapping module, let's just slip back over to Raw Therapee, we got all this detail. A lot of the detail enhancement and shape and form enhancement is down to the edge stopping slider, as you'll see shortly. But let's go back to the tool description. Scale. This control gives meaning to the difference between local and global contrast. The greater it is, the larger a detail needs to be in order to be boosted. See the note above on the influence of this setting, as on the preview of the same. Reweighting iterates. I'll just say this, you can go and read this at your leisure. Reweighting iterates, I'll never use it, okay? So, I think we're just about done for a brief précis of the tools available. So, let's go back to Raw Therapee. We're in the tone mapping section, so here's the strength. So let's turn it up. Tell you what, let's go all the way up to maximum 2. Oh dear God, that's horrible. Let's come down to minimum -1. Now, this isn't useful to us on this image, but when I first saw this, I thought, that's a bit like an Orton effect. Yes, it is, yeah. So it's always worth remembering where you can get this sort of Orton-y type effect from. Yeah, but we're certainly not going to be using that today. So let's just double click on the little return arrow there, and that puts it back to its default position. Okay, so now we know what the strength slider does. All right, so gamma. All right, okie dokie. So I'm going to take the gamma slider all the way to the left, and there we go. Right, doesn't look a lot different, does it? No. But if I take it all the way to the right, now you'll see the lights have got darker. So whatever we do with the strength and the edge stopping and the scale, it will have more of an effect in the shadows when the slider is over here, and more of an effect on the highlights or when the gamma slider is over to the left. So it's a bit sort of counterintuitive, because everybody most things are either off or dark when they're over to the left, and fully on and light when they're over to the right. So the gamma slider is slightly unintuitive here. But anyway, we'll just put the gamma back where it was by double clicking there. And now we come to the edge stopping. All right. Now then, if I just take the edge stopping up to a much higher, further over to the right value, now you can see what's going on. It's actually bringing out more form, more three-dimensionality, more 3D shape to the actual subject. Let's make it look even more over the top by turning up the strength tool. Oh my lordy, he looks a very mucky swan, doesn't he? Yes. But you'll notice that as we've turned the edge stopping all the way up, we're now developing these really deep, dark shadows. If I take the scale slider up, now remember what the scale slider does, or is. The scale slider control, this control gives meaning to the difference between local and global. The greater it is, in other words, the further over to the right it is, the larger a detail needs to be in order to be boosted. Alrighty. So if we now come back to Raw Therapee, bump, like that. If we take the scale slider over to the right, look what happens to these dark edges. These dark edges are getting sort of a negative boost. They're going darker, and we're developing all sorts of weird, strange artifacts around the edges of the subject. So the secret to this is actually bringing the scale slider down. So we're actually boosting even very, very small luminance changes. Okay. So I want to turn the tool down sort of back to its default. All right. And that looks a lot better. So are we going to want to boost the highlights or the shadows? In other words, this area, all right, or this area. So let's bring the gamma down so we're boosting more towards the highlights. And let's lift the tool strength up a little bit more. Come on. There we go. And we're sort of getting quite a nice effect on the lighter tones of the image. Now this is where, or why, I said that I want to actually use the whole image plus a separate layer, if you like, of an image processed just for the whites in the face, and a third variant of the image where we're just processing for the actual fleshy dark parts of the face. I don't really want to go over the top on the orange beak and get it all massively oversaturated, because the main centre point of the image is going to be the eye, isn't it? And if we make too much of this orange area of the beak, or bill, or whatever you might like to call it, I don't know what he calls it, but whatever it is he calls it, that's what I'll call it, because I'm not arguing with him, because he'd just rip your face off, yes. Anyway, nasty buggers. So this is where we've got to make a decision. What is it we're going to do? So first of all, you can see we're still getting artifacts over here. So I'm just going to pull this down just a little bit, and then I might shove the gamma slider over to the right and just wait for that to work out, and then pull the edge stopping down a little bit more, and you can see I'm now beginning to lose those artifacts I was having over there. I might just drop the gamma a little bit more to have more of an effect on the highlights. Why I've got another sticky cursor, I don't know. But with the gamma at its sort of default setting of 1 and a tool strength setting of 0.85 and an edge stopping value of 2.63 with a scale value of just plus 0.1, in other words the scale slider all the way over to the left, I'm getting what I class as a really nice rendition of the shape and form and detail in the swan's head with regards to the plumage and sort of around the eye. But this area is looking a little bit on the flat side. I might also, because I get a little bit suspicious about these dark areas down here, So I'm just going to pull up a standard tone curve, and I'm just going to lift the blacks a little bit. Okay, and what I want to do is just go and turn on the black clipping indicator, and I've got no black clipping in there, but I just want to sort of bring the other midtones sort of back into line where they were, and maybe just drop the highlights a little tiny bit, rather like that. So I'm using this tone curve and feeding the tone mapping into this tone curve here. So now things have gone maybe a little bit too bright, so I might just lift the gamma up just a little bit and just try and tone that down. Lift it up a little bit more. I'm sort of quite liking that, but I might just turn the tool tab down to 0.8, and let's see what that works out at. Yeah, that's a little bit more subtle. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to scoop this variant of the image over into Photoshop. Okay, so that's purely tone mapped. I'm liking what I'm seeing in the white feathers, but I'm not liking what I'm seeing here in the sort of dark fleshy areas. It's a little bit flat, it's a little bit boring. So we're going to come back into Raw Therapee, and now we're going to head off over to the Advanced tab and Wavelet Levels, and we're just going to turn on the basic contrast adjustment, and instead of selective luminance range, which we dictate with these sliders, I'm just going to throw it into whole luminance range. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is just lift up the contrast, keep tapping this contrast slider, so this contrast plus button I should say, so the sliders move along, but you'll see they move along in a staggered manner, all right, to control the various wavelet levels in the image. So all I'm going to concentrate on is this dark area here. All right, so I'm going to bring the image up to a 100% view, and all I'm going to do is just tap this slider, and I'm sort of going to go up to the sort of low 100s, and you can see the amount of detail that we're extracting from this dark fleshy area. It's crazy. If we turn the wavelet levels off, and there we go. That is dull, flat and boring. Turn the wavelet levels back on, wait for it to process out, and there we go. Alrighty, so I'm liking what's going on, but obviously I'm not liking what's going on in the feathers. It's just way too much. So all I'm going to do is come back out to fit to screen view, and this is going to be the image that I use this part of for the eye and the flashy part of the beak. So I'm going to scoot that over into Photoshop as well. Yes, so what you can see is I'm doing a multi-step process of this single raw file, and then I'm going to assemble the components in the order I want them over inside of Photoshop. So that's that one. Okay, so we're now going to come back to Raw Therapee, and I'm going to turn off wavelet settings, and I'm going to come back over to here, and I'm going to turn off tone mapping. Okay, and this version of the image I'm now going to scoot off over into Photoshop. And while all that's going on, I'm going to have a short slurp of tea. Yes, I am. Okay, so I'm just going to leave this plain unadjusted image. This does have the tone curve adjustment on it still, but it doesn't have any tone mapping on, and it doesn't have any wavelets on. So this shot here is wavelets and tone mapping. So all I'm going to do is to come to this one, which is just the tone mapping. Okay, and I'm just going to pick up my move tool, and I'm just going to drag onto the tone map bit, hold down the shift key and drop. Okay, so that's in perfect register. Alrighty, so I'm not going to do any fancy blend modes, I'm not going to use any fancy luminosity masking. All I'm going to do is just a basic simple brush drawn mask. So I'm going to come into 100% and notice I put a white mask over there, and with that white mask and a brush painting with black because I don't want to see it, I'm just going to reveal the underlying wavelets processing. Okay, I think I'm just going to turn my brush opacity down to the upper 70s, and I'm just going to come in and sort of brush around the dark fleshy areas of the eye, and we're just going to work along here, and I'm going to turn this layer off shortly, or this layer mask off. Okay, so you can see the difference. So shift click, boring, dull, flat and horrible, much improved from a texture and contrast way. And also don't forget, this and the underlying layer have both got the same amount of tone mapping in them, but this layer that I'm brushing in, yeah, which is the layer underneath, has also got the wavelets contrast as well. And as you can see, all the dark lines, as I brush over them, get a little bit darker. So I'm always going on about getting contrast under control and redistributing it where you want it. And what are we doing here? Nothing more than redistributing contrast. Tone mapping redistributes contrast. Wavelets redistributes contrast because we were working in the contrast module in Wavelets. Now, where it goes out of focus, I'm not going to increase the contrast. So this is why I'm using a rough drawn mask. Okay, and we'll just lift up there, and of course it's in focus there, so we'll just dab that bit in, and we're just going to keep the edge of the brush just sort of touching these very, very outer white filaments of these feathers, and we don't want to overspill into the feathers, otherwise they'll look overly sharp. And just want to make sure that I've got everything, and there we go. I've obviously got, if I hold down the Alt key and click on the mask, I can see the mask. So let's go in here and fill in the gaps, if you like. And it doesn't matter if they look a little bit blotchy, because it just helps to add more ununiformity, if you like, to the bumpy texture that we're trying to reveal quite successfully, I think, in the dark fleshy parts of this swan's face. So we'll out click on the mask again, and there we go. So there is my hand done blend of these two images. All right, there's the wavelets processing, well, wavelets and tone mapping processing in full, and here it is masked out of everywhere in the image apart from the fleshy bits. Alrighty, so the next thing I'm going to do is come over to here, and we'll just come out of fit to screen view, and this is the version of the image that's just got the tone curve adjustment on it. Alright, so all I'm going to do is get my move tool, and bring that over, and then shift and drag and drop. There we go. So that's brought that in. And all I'm going to do is add a white mask to that, and then with a black brush, alrighty, and I'll make this brush quite wide. It is nice and soft. If you go to the hardness is 0, and all I'm going to do is paint where I want this detail to be, because don't forget this was shot on a 180mm macro on a 1.5 crop censored camera. The head is out of focus as it's going away from you, so I don't want to emphasize all the detail in the very out of focus bits. I just don't. Why would I want to emphasize out of focus detail? To me, it makes no sense. So there we go. So this is the important part of the image, and I reckon we are just about done. The next thing I'm going to do is add an empty layer above this in the stack. And what are we going to do with this empty layer? I'm just going to, in the normal blend mode with the brush, I'm just going to Command minus to take it out to fit the screen view. I'll shrink the brush down a little bit, and all I'm going to do is paint with 100% opacity black paint. Okay, and we're going to paint over the nice out of focus background, and we're going to feather it across the out of focus part of the swan. In other words, where depth of field is running out, and rather like that. Okay, and then I might just round off that corner, and I might just dab a little bit in there. Alrighty. So what the hell are you doing, Andy? Yeah. Well, wait and see, because I'm going to go filter, and I'm going to go blur, and we're going to go to Gaussian blur, and we are going to Gaussian blur by around about, whoops-a-daisy, behave yourself, around about 600 pixels, between 600 and 650 pixels. Okay, so all we're going to do is add a white mask to that, painting with black, and I'm just going to draw attention, or draw the attention of the viewer's eye to the part of the image, yeah, that I want them to look at, just like that, yeah. Okay, so what we've done is a very rough, misshapen, yeah, that's right, vignette. So we're just going to feather that vignette, and because I'm painting black on white, as I feather it, I sort of spread it away from the centre of the vignette, some sort of darkening off, and then of course to lighten the overall effect of this pseudo vignette, I can just drop the opacity of the layer to probably around 80%. Alrighty. So that, my friends, is basically it. So, you know, all we're going to do now is come into it at 100%, and you can see the sharpness of this image. People say to me, well, Andy, how do you sharpen an image? Well, the image is sharp anyway, and all it's got on it in, where are we? In Raw Therapee. The only sharpening, has it got any sharpening under the details tab? No, sharpening's turned off. The only sharpening it's got on it is a little tiny bit of capture sharpening, which is automatically calculated by Raw Therapee when you bring the image in the first place in export. And all we're using is the RCD plus bilinear dual demosaic algorithm with a contrast threshold of 11. And the capture sharpening, I've just left it at 9. In theory, you could actually put a 9 up here in this value, well, you could actually change it and maybe just put the contrast threshold up to 11, but it doesn't really make a lot of difference. So we've just got the tiniest bit of capture sharpening on, that's all, nothing else. We haven't done any sharpening in Photoshop. All the sharpening is down to the contrast redistribution that we've done inside tone mapping and wavelets, alright? And the mix of the two. Now comes the interesting bit, okay? Topaz fans, yes, this is it. This is your moment in the sun. I want to create a stamp visible layer, so I'm just going to use the basics panel of Greg Benzie's Lumenzia, but you know, we could have just gone Shift, Alt or Option, Command or Control E, and that indeed would create a stamp visible layer, but of course that's not called stamp. Okay, that's just layer 4. Anyway, I'll delete that layer because I don't want it. So we've just got this stamp visible layer, and I'm just going to come up to Filter, Topaz Labs, Topaz Sharpen AI. I am not concerned what it does to the image as a whole in the slightest. All I'm interested in is what it does to this little area here. Okay, so I've actually already rehearsed this, as you can well understand and imagine, and I did it with Too Soft Very Blurry, which is one of my favourite ones, with a remove blur setting of 13, suppress noise setting of 0, and no added grain. We're not going to bother trying to select anything to include or exclude from the sharpening area. We're just going to throw it across the entire image. But all we're interested in is around the eye, okay, and what it's doing to the feathers here. And I am quite happy with that. Thank you very much. So I'm just going to click Apply. And we'll just wait for that to process out. Shouldn't take too long. And there we go. Well, I don't want to see it across the entirety of the image because it's crap, it's too much. So, Alt. Click on the Add Mask to add a black mask. Hit B for our brush tool. And X to swap out black with white. Okay, so now we're painting with a white brush. I'm just going to use the left square bracket key to turn it down. I'm actually going to turn the opacity down to around about 75-76%. Again, it's a very soft edge brush, and we are just going to paint with white on this black mask and just sharpen up, yeah, these feathers. Now we could do it through a luminosity mask if we were going to be really fussy about it, but when you see the results I'm getting with a carefully drawn hand built mask, if you like, why on earth would you want to go to them either? So let's check further down, and you can see these feathers have now come back. They were in focus in the first place. It's just these around the eye where the focus had fallen off a bit. So we're just going to paint over a little bit more of the face, and might bring the size of the brush up now, and just brush in a bit of that extra sharpness there, I think, and that will just about do. Alrighty, yes. Now what I could do as well is, do we need to lift the eye a little bit? Let's put a adjustment layer in for levels, and let's just move the midtones slightly to the left, just slightly, okay, and then I'm going to pull the properties, bottom of the properties dialog box into view, and I'm just going to click invert. Alright, so now I've we can't see that adjustment. And I'm just going to come in with a much smaller brush. Command plus to lift the image up, and I'm just going to lift some of the brighter areas in the outside part of the eye. I'm being really thick here, I can't remember the iris. Yes, right, okay, so that's just about it. Might put a little dab just in there where that pink bit is. Okay, and so let's come out to a fit to screen view. Let's pull out the layers panel. Okay, and hold down the Alt key. That's where we started, yeah, and with our single layer, which is both wavelets and tone mapping, and of course you can see how over the top it is. But when we brought all the other components to put into play, you can see just how blooming spectacular that image looks. And it's honestly, it takes no effort. And if I wasn't talking to you guys in the video, it would take even less time. So there you go. I mean, look at the amount of detail that we've got in there. I mean, it is just ludicrous. You can't get this sort of processing out of Lightroom. You can't get it out of Photoshop. You've got to use something like Raw Therapee. In fact, I can't think of any other processor available on the market generally that actually does wavelets, and the tone mapping inside Raw Therapee is also a lot different from, oh God, that awful bloody program. What did it used to be called? Photomatics? Ooh, dear lordy. Ooh, hideous thing. So there you go, guys and gals. That's just about it. We started out there in Raw Therapee, and we've ended up here. Thanks very much to Raw Therapee, Photoshop for allowing us to do the easy assembly, and Topaz Sharpen AI for just allowing us to bring a little bit of sharpness back to these feathers under the eye and sort of in the cheek area, which for some strange reason were a little bit on the soft side. So there you go, guys and gals. Hope you found that useful. Hope you found it interesting. Don't forget, if you want access to the raw files that I use in these training videos, slip off over into my Patreon website. There's a link in the description below, and consider giving this channel an extra bit of support, and in return you will get lots of exclusive member content, including in every post links to where you can go and download the raw files for free. Okay, as I said before, guys and gals, hope you found that useful, hope you found it interesting. Stay safe, stay well, keep taking the pictures, and I'll speak to you very, very soon. Yes, I will. And don't forget, if any of you have got anything specific you want me to cover in a video on YouTube, just let me know in the comments below, or you can email me at tuition@wildlifeinpixels.net. Okay, speak to you soon, guys. Tooroo.